the voice of dread. There are hours in a night when the world feels like a held breath, and Mara knew that breath better than most. She ran a late-night show that asked strangers to hang the edges of their lives out into the dark and let her read them aloud. It paid the bills, and it made a small kind of solace. One Tuesday, while coffee cooled and the console lights blinked, her desk phone chimed. An unknown voicemail with nothing but a hiss and her name, spoken soft as if someone had crawled inside the room. She pressed play and heard static, long, hungry, and then the voice, close enough to set cold against her teeth. It didn't carry a dialect or accent. It carried small knowledge. It described the knuckle scar she kept from jamming the studio door, the half-drunk cup of coffee, the way the reel-to-reel hummed when she leaned close. It spoke the exact time her mother had once hummed a lullaby, a tiny wrong note she'd never told anyone. Mara's throat tightened. A voice shouldn't know the small, private map of a life. At first, she assumed a prank, an obsessively observant caller, a producer with a bent for creepy artifice. She played the clip for no one, rewound, and listened until the hiss felt like a second pulse. It detailed things she had never said on air. The dog-eared notebook with page corners stained in coffee and marked in red, a sequence of numbers scribbled like a map, and the attic window that caught the moon just so. Each particular landed like a pebble into water, rings widening into the room where she sat alone. Curiosity stubbornly outpaced fear. To test the voice's claims, she set a tiny trap. On the air, she read a harmless, false detail to a caller and watched the ECG line of the studio, no reaction, just the steady landfill of night. Then she whispered the real test off mic. A specific time in 3 minutes, the power would blink. The console hiccuped, and lamps went gray, as if someone had inhaled the room. The lights returned with the metallic scent of ozone, and the voice in the voicemail hummed exactly 3 minutes later in the static, as if it had been waiting. She became a collector. Every whisper of the inbox was a new compass point. The voice unfolded in fragments, confident in the shape of things it had not yet claimed to be responsible for, but seemed intimately familiar with. The old transmitter tower's name the town had forgotten, the tiny dent in her microphone's grill where a drunken guest had crashed his head years earlier. The reels began to attract a pattern, words repeated across different recordings, like a chorus learning a new verse. Insomnia gathered at the edges of her eyes. Neighbors noticed the change in her hours. A few said she sounded different on air cleaner, somehow hollowed like a window with too much light. Mara chalked that up to adrenaline until the town itself started matching the recordings. A caller from the Eastern Bloc swore the radio had told her to look under the steps. There, she found a cracked concrete slab and nothing but a scrap of brittle tape. Another woke to her porch light, playing the same phrase, "Remember the attic window." Each instance felt like a footstep behind a wall that had suddenly begun to echo. Maps and memory conspired to point her outward. She drove when the fog sat heavy and the air smelled like old wire. The tower crouched beyond the last streetlight, rusted iron rising into the low cloud. The gate fell open as if it had been waiting, creaking a tired welcome. At the base, an access door yielded a metal stair that spiraled up past peeling paint. On a level platform, a small booth held a microphone, a spool of tape, and dust arranged in a fan, as though someone had been listening and then stepped away forever. Inside the booth, the air tasted faintly of iron. The microphone looked like an old friend dented, patient. A reel sat in the machine with a label in looping handwriting. Mara's name, a date she hadn't yet lived to see, and beneath it, a single phrase she had heard across dozens of messages. She didn't touch the tape at first. Instead, she cupped her palms to the cold metal and listened. The silence answered with something like remembering. The exact inflection she used when she told a joke, reproduced in a voice that was not wholly hers. She brought the reel home, as if the town might surrender its little oddities to domestic light. In the studio, she threaded it into the recorder and fed the machine the way a midwife feeds breath into a newborn. What emerged was a recording of that very action her hands, the hiss of thread, the room's floorboard complaining spoken in her cadence, with a small, deliberate wrongness at the edges. The tape told her things she had only been thinking in fragments, couched as fact. It named a future she had not yet stepped into, and asked for coordinates she did not own. Paranoia is a slow erosion. She tried to erase the tape's physical scissors, a magnet, a small bonfire in a metal pail. But each attempt yielded a new spool with the same voice waiting behind the ash. Even deleted files replicated on the workstation at impossible times. A folder called Do Not Listen would appear at 3:03 a.m. and contain a single clip with her own voice describing a choice she had not yet made. The town's old radio frequency, once used for weather warnings, began to carry a thin thread of sound at night. Not music, not static, but the precise timbre of her name, spoken like a summons. On air, she fought between confession and curiosity. The ratings spiked as listeners called to describe the things the voice had told them to watch for. Lines filled with people asking whether they were being listened to or had become the listeners themselves. During 1 hour, a caller asked if a voice could be taught to love. The studio glass fogged with her breath reflected behind it. The booth looked empty and full at once. When she mouthed the words, the microphone took them and returned them slightly altered, as if the room itself were translating her. Last reel she found had no label, only a thin strip of yellowing tape. She threaded it and pressed play. From the machine came her voice describing the exact moment she stood at the studio window, her hands clasped, the city lights breathing, and then a line that felt less like prophecy than invitation. If you are listening, stop. There was a pause, a static like a held breath, and then, or perhaps, lean in. The recording folded back into a silence that hummed with the shape of an answer she could not rearrange. At midnight, she opened the live line and let the spool run. She read the last words into the mic, and for a moment, the room held as if listening to itself. Calls came, one after another, voices thin and trembling, repeating phrases she had heard only on tape. Somewhere beyond the glass, the tower's silhouette leaned into the fog like a question. On the air, the show's name felt oddly literal now. She realized she no longer knew whether she had been coaxing the voice out of the world, or if the world had been coaxing her into giving it a shape. She turned the microphone off and listened to the small, ordinary noises of the studio: clockwork hum, distant traffic, the fridge settling. Her reflection in the glass smiled a moment before she did, and her mouth formed the last phrase without a sound. "You will hear me if you tune your silence to my frequency." Outside, the town's porch lights blinked in a pattern that almost answered. She pressed record not to catch the voice, but to keep from becoming it. And the tape accepted her choice in the way machines accept any graceful, certain thing. Without judgment, only repetition.